Welcome. Today's post is D.N.A. Q plus 8 equals Y. Published on December 8, 2022. What is coded in your DNA? Have you noticed how many things going on right now are tied to a curious shape that could be defined as a helix or DNA? Or the many stories going on with genes, as in the clothing? We'll be decoding DNA, genes, and a whole lot more in today's post. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button, and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts, and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. From the most recent Q post, what is coded in your DNA? Have you noticed how many things going on right now are tied to a curious shape that could be defined as a helix/DNA? Or the many stories going on with a gene/gene symbolism? Did you notice that it's connected to Kanye West's breakdown? Or that it's all been telegraphed since at least 2019? August 2019, pro-Nazi messages by Twitter CEO as Jack Dorsey hacked. September 2019, Adidas Qatar 2022 World Cup logo debut, D.N.A shape. October 2022, pro-Nazi messages by Kanye, Adidas drops him, costs him $1 billion. November 2022, Adidas Qatar 2022 World Cup starts. How often does a major celebrity make national news due to sending Nazi propaganda? Why is it time to Adidas plus D.N.A plus World Cup? October 2021, Facebook renames to Meta, Data, with D.N.A symbol. November 2022, Adidas Qatar 2022 World Cup, D.N.A. November 2022, Musk/YE post within one day about genes/gene, D.N.A. November 2022, Trump sued by gene/gene plus umbrella, D.N.A protection. November 2022, Q posts about D.N.A protection. The answers are at the end of the post, but before you can run you have to walk. So let's begin by learning what D.N.A is even a com for. D.N.A. Officially, D.N.A defines the coded information/instructions inside a cell which is necessary to create any living creature. According to Jurassic Park, D.N.A. equals the building blocks of life. They are the blueprints for building any living thing. How might blueprints for life be used as a symbol? In the 17th episode of Season 9, The Simpsons have a short about D.N.A. It asserts that D.N.A is not just a recipe for creating a child, but that it defines how fat they will become. Notice how the baby watches the mother eating pizza and then imitates it. Stop and think for just a moment about that. It's easy to gloss over a key detail that unlocks how D.N.A is used as a code. The short asserts that people are fat because of genetics but then contradicts this by presenting the baby's obesity as a result of learned behavior. Even writing it out like that, I doubt it'll click, so let me spell it out in as clear a way as possible. D.N.A literal definition, blueprint to create life plus growth defined by genes, adolescence. D.N.A symbolic use, blueprint of life plus education/nutrition/medications during growth. Adolescence. Do you get what I mean? D.N.A not just used as a literal genetic definition of what a person must become, but instead the intended plan for development. You may underestimate this if you don't think about it carefully. This will unlock a ton of comms. This includes what Q meant. What is coded in your D.N.A equals this is asking us about who is brainwashing/contaminating you. What has bad information, nutrition, and medications done to you? What are you supposed to be, and why has it veered off course from this? You can read this, protect your D.N.A, as in protecting your children's development. That they have entities pumping poison into the kids from school, media, sugar, hormones and everything else. Our D.N.A is in danger because there are entities who have control over our mind and bodies from birth until death. They guide us and some do not have our best intentions in mind. Some have taken the human blueprint and modified it so that people grow into something as grotesque as possible. A programmed robot, a gluttonous monster, or even an actual lunatic. Now you understand the Q post, but this rabbit hole goes much deeper than that basic symbol. I'll be going through the history of DNA all the way back hundreds of years, but I want to make it clear first how it is used in modern contexts. When I went over the Simpsons short before, the entire episode is also about DNA, and it's a spectacular one for understanding how DNA is used in comms. The episode focuses on Lisa Simpson having a crisis due to being told that all Simpsons have genes that will make them dumb starting around Lisa's age. Bart at her age was just as smart as she was, but then the Simpsons genes kick in. Even without comms, this episode is downright cruel because it turns out that Lisa was panicking for nothing. Only Simpson boys like Bart have cursed genes and are doomed to fail. Simpsons women become brilliant and successful. Bart is told that he has no hope of ever amounting to anything. That due to bad genes he will be a spectacular failure, and so he embraces the idiocy by imitating all the other male idiots. However, just like the short with the mom teaching her baby to get fat by eating pizza, the same symbolism applies here. When you watch the episode carefully, you'll see that dumb decisions made by Bart, and there are many, have nothing to do with his genes and everything to do with imitating Homer Simpson. Like when he eats a mass of melted chocolate and then watches mind-numbing TV. This is obvious, but parents have a role in making kids unhealthy and dumb. You already know this, but you may not realize the scope of the implications. Remember the Q post. What is coded in your DNA? Bad and unhealthy behavior is learned. It's parenting, but also junk food and various types of media designed to dumb a person from birth. Society has long been sabotaged to promote an unhealthy direction. Our DNA has been altered as our growth has been carefully sabotaged by people who do not necessarily have our best interests in mind. And it's so much worse than just that. Note carefully the story. If it were just imitating parents, then why was Bart smart as Lisa at age 8 and dumb as Homer at age 10? The answer may be obvious if you've read my Simpsons decodes before. This show is all about MK Ultra. There is an intentional brainwashing going on in that show to Bart to turn him into a brain-dead criminal. The show exists as a promotional tool for any that want to do the same thing. Lisa is not MK'd, and in most episodes she begins and ends the story as a willing participant in brainwashing Bart. Just like that episode implies, the very first Simpsons begins with Bart presented as highly intelligent and inquisitive, but then Homer gives him a nonsensical answer, and he makes crazy eyes. Lisa meanwhile hears about bed bugs, which is symbolism for spying. This is tied to her symbolism, which is tied to computers used in spying. Her name, Lisa, is a symbol of spy ops, as the Apple Lisa represented the high-end computer that would be used for that purpose. 1976, first Apple Mac released $666.66. 1978, Steve Jobs' daughter Lisa Brennan born. 1978, Apple Lisa project begins. Plus 9 years. 1987, Steve Jobs acknowledges for the first time Lisa is his 9-year-old daughter. 1987, Simpsons premieres with Lisa Simpson as the smart 8-year-old daughter of a nuclear power plant worker. Most prominently in the 80s, spy ops on children were represented by the Finders cult. March 23, 1987, Finders Group disbands plans to move to Tallahassee. March 23, 1987, Simpsons project begins, Good Night Simpsons, first short. This clarifies a transition in ops that The Simpsons acted as a marker for. The Finders were an organization that involved naked and brainwashed children that used computers tied to phone lines pre-internet used to coordinate education. According to the recently released government files on the Finders, the CIA was said to have admitted to owning the Finders organization as a front that turned bad. Those PCS that used the phones were from Radio Shack and made their debut around the same time Apple did. 1976, Apple I released for $666.66. 1977, Apple II released. August 3, 1977, TRS-80 early fully built computer sold at Radio Shack. August 3, 1977, Joint Senate hearing on MK Ultra, Q link to this. August 4, 1977. DOE established to handle nuclear materials, Q clearance. Anyway, returning to The Simpsons. All the male Simpsons as failures and female ones as successful. Lisa in this episode is unique in that she only becomes a 6 only at the end. Note the very end of the episode has Lisa right after realizing she won't become dumb solving a puzzle with the answer being 6. 6 is equal to 666 when used in contexts like these. The reason why Simpsons women all become successes is because of DNA evolution, as in they have better blueprints, planned growth, than the masses of sheep and far better blueprints than the MK Ultra which they foster. The development of a regular person, sheep, is not sabotaged as much as an MK Ultra subject, but unlike a 6, they don't have a world built to help them grow. Quite the opposite. Most everything in the world is built like a Shakespeare play. Jokes built into it for both rich and poor. In the same way all major media is built for both comms-aware and uneducated alike. However, they intentionally make it so that the uneducated is pushed further into the dumb and the comms-aware is pushed further into the smart. In this way the blueprints for the comms-aware and unaware are dramatically diverged. Those that grow with these benefits will become smarter, healthier, safer and even can find job opportunities presented in them. Those without see no such business opportunities by watching pop culture. They get dumber the more they ingest and are conditioned into being sheep that agree with the current narrative. Why then do they also need things like the finders? Well, in exchange for this lifestyle of opportunity a sacrifice is suggested and this is why MK Ultra is utilized. They offer a child to be de-evolved in exchange for another child to be evolved beyond the standard sheep. Look again at the D.N.A. short. Notice how Troy McClure looks horrified of Billy at first glance. That's a nod to being unwanted. The child to be sacrificed. The sacrifice being represented by literally eating the DNA of Billy as he does in the short. To return to The Simpsons. This promotion of brainwash is easiest to see when you go back to the earliest stuff. In one of the earliest episodes on the Tracy Ullman show Homer and then Lisa each encourage Bart to injure himself trying to follow instructions. Note how in the first one it's just Homer and then Lisa gets better and better at doing the same as she symbolizes an accomplice. One child up and one child down. Evolution/to evolution. In the very first episode they adopt a racing dog. A symbol of driving. Signifying the start of the op. The name, Santa's Little Helper, defining getting presents for the action. Santa/Satan. This is why in the Simpsons movie there's a whole subplot that has a spider pig that turns into Harry Plopper. This is symbol of someone who spies, spider, turning into a wizard, as in evolving. Pig itself is a symbol of communications, ham radio. Pigs have been used to symbolize comms communication for a long time and I suspect the shape of DNA as a spiral may originate in the shape of the pig's tail. Of course one could always argue that DNA is exactly as advertised but when I dug into the history I realized this was unlikely. The history of DNA ties into when the MK Ultra boss got his job as CIA head. February 26, 1953. Alan W. Dulles, first civilian director CIA, MK Ultra. February 28, 1953. Francis Crick and James Watson discover the chemical structure of DNA molecule double helix polymer using studies. Note the shape of DNA being a twisted ladder, going up or down. The actual history of DNA in modern terms. Note the imagery prominently displayed inside it of pentagons. This doesn't mean DNA isn't real, there are many things that are real and used for comms like nuclear power. There are also things attached to those things like nuclear bombs which while also real are vastly different than presented due to national secrets. I wouldn't blindly assume everything in a science book is proven. The common fact that every cell of our blood has our complete genetic information in it may or may not be true. It's not like criminal science that identifies by blood is doing so by examining strings of D.N.A. But I am sure it's used in comms. In The Simpsons, Homer is the one at the heart of this deal. He represents a puppet. This is why his birthdate is tied to Kermit the Frog, invoking puppetry as the next iteration. Plus one day. May 9, 1955, Kermit the Frog introduced. May 10, 1955, Homer Simpson official birthdate. It is tied into him being a nuclear safety inspector that slacks off letting people die. His job as an idiot at a nuclear power plant is a perfect symbol, as nuclear is about keeping secrets. It also represents his monitoring of Bart while also his being monitored himself. Monitored by the richest man in town. The one financing Homer's lifestyle in exchange for Bart. This is why Homer convinces Bart to give Monty Burns blood. And in exchange getting a crowbar plus human sacrifice head. The crowbar representative of what Bart is to become. The sacrifices become condition tools for all sorts of purposes. Or in the episode where Homer sells a damaged grill to his boss. This episode involved Homer trying to get rid of his failure of a grill. Lisa laying the foundation. Why? Because once again Lisa symbolizes the spying. Lisa's hair being the shape of a star also ties into this. Marge's hair is a beehive. Note the names of the children. Honey Bee and BB. Note in early shorts Lisa intentionally making Bart feel like a failure, and all of them promising not to laugh at Bart but then doing it anyway. Also Bart is enticed to steal cookies and then gets caught after eating all of them. Evolution and de-evolution. One child goes up, and one child goes down. To truly understand it though, let's go through the entire history of it. DNA origin, history lesson. The origin of DNA is said to tie into a man named Gregor Mendel of the Catholic Church. His studies in the 1800s laid the foundation for the science of genetics. Was this a calm? Remember that even things that are real are often repurposed to be calms. He could have used any plant to demonstrate how genetics work. Which plant did he choose? Pea plants. If you've read my posts before, you may remember that one calm tied to people working together is plants. The origin of the CIA is tied to the Order of Malta, a group dedicated to the Pope. The Pope has his own symbol, P. Get it? Pea plants equals pea plants. The symbol tied to inheritance of plants. The Catholic Church worker chose the pea plants. Symbol of those loyal to the Pope getting the inheritance. This does not mean any of what he did was incorrect, only that it was used as a message about loyalty being rewarded. Also of note in relation to Gregor Mendel is a man named Gideon Mantell who discovered the first fossilized teeth and the second dinosaur ever found. He discovered them in 1922, the same year Gregor Mendel was born. Gideon Mantell. Gregor Mendel. That similarity in spelling and letter count might be coincidence, but these are the origins of two major sciences. They were active at the same time with such similar names. It reminds me of Stephen King and Steven Spielberg both starting the same year to be the tops of their respective media which relate to horror fiction and pop movies. In both cases I believe this symbolism is a marker for easier identification. This could even explain why Gregor Mendel changed his name from Johann to Gregor, because it matched. I suspect tricks like that help the media of the day recognize who is owned by who. They already knew the ones with money were behind Gideon, a major part in creating a field of science, so they decide to create another field of science, and rather than having to contact each of them individually, this name quickly lets them know who is behind who. That's my speculation, of course, and there is likely no way to prove it one way or another. Another origin of DNA goes back to 1869. A man who worked on large amounts of cat sperm first identified DNA from white pus of soldiers, before moving on to various animal sperm. 1869 Frederick Miescher DNA origin discovered in 1869 in pus cells from bandages of Crimean War soldiers. His position in science was inherited from his father. Family business. 1872 Yellowstone National Park founded, animals. 1872 Miescher extended his studies to the sperm of carp, frogs, chicken, and bulls. We were talking about the second ever dinosaur found, what about the first? The first was believed to be a giant human scrotum. Found in 1677. The same year a man named Shaftesbury was incarcerated. A man opposed to the Pope. Not a pea plant. Sounds to me like this was a calm about having control over a powerful figure trying to stop the Pope taking control. His name being Shaftesbury being why they would make a joke about a giant scrotum without a shaft. Look at it and think about that, it was found when he was then locked up. So they spread around this joke, and then it was repurposed as the literal origin of all dinosaur bones. This is as good an indication as I've seen of keeping a joke alive. This also perfectly ties into pea plants as the point of contention is in stopping the Pope from making pea plants. It's also possible he was involved with prostitution, as I suspect even before blackmail took hold they controlled politics with sex. Gaining access to brothels for voting the right way. The actual origin of the shape of DNA as a ladder ties into photo 51 from Rosalind Franklin. This was the same time CERN first met. Note the same day of photo 51 is the birthdate of Jeffrey Sinclair from Babylon 5. This is meaningful because I decoded Babylon 5 as strongly tied into the blackmail ops. May 6, 1952, photo 51 X-ray, origin of double helix. 05/May 8, 1952, CERN first meeting. May 6, 1952, Michael O'Hare born, Epstein connection. 1955, Area 51. February 22, 1993, Babylon 5 Jeffrey O'Hare, Rabbit/Playboy, gathering pilot. February 22, 1993, Jeffrey Epstein Shell Zorro purchase land. February 21, 1993, Star Fox X-Wing SNES plus Rabbit, barrel roll meme with Rabbit. The implication that comes to mind is that evolution is tied into being blackmailed. That is how it works after all. Blackmail required. So for the select few move up as far as possible, pea plants, a select few move down as far as possible, MK Ultra, and the rest are made to exist as the masses of sheep that will consume as much as possible. Yet another major part of DNA history is a man named Oswald Avery who in 1944 when he discovered the transforming principle. What is the transforming principle? Note the years. 1944, Oswald Avery identifies DNA as the transforming principle. March 20, 1943, Tex Avery's best-known MGM character Droopy debut. March 23, 1943, Vicodin first produced, treats depression, Droopy, transforming. Transforming. As in people taking medications and becoming different people. Altering DNA. I also find his first name curious as Oswald is the name of the original Walt Disney bunny before Mickey. Though that could easily be coincidence. Tex Avery's second most famous character was a seductress who debuted around the same time named Red Hot Riding Hood. Same cartoon Walt Disney chose to animate early on. But let's return to medications for a moment. October 1, 1990, Dr. Mario USA release. October 1, 1990, Human Genome Project formally begins. A game where Mario throws endless pills into a patient. Overconsumption calms. Same day as the Human Genome Project. Modifying genes. What happens when a growing kid takes pills? Does it change his blueprint? Perhaps most evident with hormones. What else is done to modify the blueprint? Let's return to that Simpsons DNA episode. The very start of the episode involves the kids eating poorly. One eating Salisbury soup and drinking coffee. Note the origin of the Salisbury steak is tied to one of the first food faddists, getting the masses of people to eat specific things under the guise of health. He suggested a diet of Salisbury steak 3 times a day with gravy and drinking lots of coffee. It's an intentionally bad diet. He viewed vegetables as poisonous. This was a health guru. This is not a coincidence that someone promoting less vegetables and more gravy became a face of health. South Park had Salisbury steak as a plot point in the first episode of What Cartman Wanted Most. The episode had a running gag of Cartman being manipulated into eating more and more bad food. This is much like the famously awful food pyramid of the 80s and 90s, which told kids to eat endless amounts of carbohydrates. What else is used to modify kids' blueprint? Metal Gear Solid, Genome Soldiers. The Genome Project was mentioned before, and Metal Gear Solid focused on an enemy faction called the Genome Soldiers. This is a game where the player takes on the role of an adult man named Solid Snake who is stripped naked and given a mission of infiltration. Note the date of release in relation to legislation. October 21, 1998, Children's Privacy Act. October 21, 1998, Metal Gear Solid released. Think about these two in conjunction with one another. The point was in keeping pornography away from kids, and the same day Metal Gear Solid comes out. A game with a protagonist is a hypermasculine adult man trying to sneak into a top-secret facility. And his name is Solid Snake. A penis joke. The game has over 20 minutes at the start where Solid Snake is naked. Though this was an optional, briefing, cut scene that only people who played it a long time ago remember. The first thing he does in-game is exit a giant phallic object and swims like a sperm. Screenshot 2 picks up. The whole thing is symbolizing that this legislation to protect kids does nothing. Children will just say they are adults by clicking that meaningless warning and then infiltrate to look at pornography. It's similar to that BoJack Horseman joke with the 3 kids in a trench coat named Adult Man that is always trying to get alcohol and date girls. His every trait is tied to emphasize that he is an adult and not 3 kids in a trench coat. In the same way, Solid Snake's hyper-manliness just makes the joke stronger. A child at the controller role pretending to be a man in a game that requires you to study a woman's butt. There's a whole section where to pick out Meryl from all the other soldiers you have to watch for her but wiggle. I also looked at the original because obviously if he was tied to sex comms then surely the first game was also timed to something sexual. July 13, 1987, Metal Gear, Solid Snake. July 5, 1987, Leisure Suit Larry, first famous pornography game. Same week. The very first sex game, and I actually know of an MK kid that was introduced to sex through that game in conjunction with Playboy's Left Out. While it is slightly disturbing, the Solid Snake joke doesn't necessarily have any inherent negative connotation. The pornography industry, on the other hand, now that screws kids up if they are raised on it. Creating dopamine addicts out of kids. Getting them to hole up and look at pornography all day. I looked at the most famous one as well. November 12, 2001, famous pornography site launched, Hungary. November 13, 2021, Metal Gear Solid 2, Oranges. Noted initially being Hungary-based, before spreading, as I suspect that's the meaning of oranges, as his signature box used as a hiding spot. Consumption comms. This concept of turning the country into pornography addicts. Note the famous birth of the first cloned sheep. Dolly, first cloned sheep. Clone named after Playboy model Dolly Parton. A sheep clone from a breast. This was 1997 as the internet was rapidly becoming focused on pornography. So this was perhaps a way to discuss the topic of mass brainwashing people into being hypnotized. The way they achieved cloning was specifically stated to achieve success they had to put the host to sleep to get the desired behavior. Sleep symbolism in this context being about putting masses of people into a tranquil addicted slumber. This is how they got masses of people to be sheep clones. I was able to confirm this too. How? Note the same day of the sheep clone Dolly Parton herself was animated on Saturday Night Live. An episode that led up to Dolly Parton with a skit about the masturbation and doing it even though your grandmother says it's a sin. Talked into it by Tina Turner. February 22, 1997. Dolly Parton SNL, creepy stalker cartoon plus Alec Baldwin plus Tina Turner with skit about a young girl talking about the sin of masturbation. February 22, 1997. Dolly Parton sheep clone announced from breast clone. Note the Dolly Parton cartoon itself. About a man stalking Dolly Parton. Symbolism of masses of people newly stalking various adult models. Masturbating to online pictures of women. Exploding in numbers across the world. What was the most popular pornography figure of that era? That'd be a girl named Dani Ash. Does that name sound familiar? Might explain Dani from Game of Thrones based on my research. This was the queen of internet pornography at the time the first few books were released. Same name and famous for being nude. I find that hard to be a coincidence. Anyway, porn addiction is a serious problem. Note his father left his Playboy out at age 5. I believe that's a common tactic for MK'd kids to get them into an addiction early. I started this post talking about Jurassic Park, so let's consider the symbolism of that with D.N.A. D.N.A, modern usage. This was a connection that surprised me. The SNES launched the same day as the book. By itself that means nothing, but the signature game of the SNES launch took place on Dinosaur Island. November 20, 1990. Dinosaur Island, Jurassic Park book, revolutionizes film 3D CGI when adapted. November 20, 1990. Dinosaur Island launch, SNES Operation Midnight. Furthermore, the signature effect for the SNES was the 3D Mode 7. Meaningful because when Jurassic Park was made into a film it revolutionized 3D CG. If it weren't for the fact that this Mario was on Dinosaur Land I would write this off as a coincidence, but it's not. These are connected ops. Note the focus in the film about evolution versus de-evolution. The film is famously terrible, and I believe it represented Nintendo staying out of films, out of the territory of the others that were either helping them or at least staying out of the way. Jurassic Park was the top film and a media craze itself while Nintendo was the top-selling toy of the entire 80s and early 90s. Anyway, notice Dinosaur Land as well as riding a dinosaur. There is also all the themed lands after junk food. Chocolate Island, Vanilla Island, Donut Plains, and so on. Sold in McDonald's. Symbolism of consumption. Trying to get people to eat/buy more and more. This does not necessarily make Nintendo villainous nor does it make them innocent. These comms appear to be what was desired of them by outside forces trying to weaken and take over parts of the country. The addictive games may have been a small part of someone else's plan. SNES as the successor to the top-selling toy for 4 years straight. That's unlikely to be coincidence, and it ties into much of what I've already decoded about Nintendo in this period of time. SNES originally thought to be called SFX, just like the 3D mode of the SNES, the symbol of pushing technology. And what kinds of messaging was inside Nintendo games outside of food? Primary launch title outside the mandatory Mario game was F-Zero. A game about high-speed driving and crashing. Note on the right addictive description. F-Zero I've gone over before. Symbolism of Falcon Punch equals abortion. Following to doom. Bart Lemming. This following someone to death goes back quite a bit farther than you may expect. 10/24/October 24, 1911. British explorer Captain Falcon Scott's expedition of 5 leaves Cape Evans for South Pole. March 29, 1912. Captain Falcon Scott makes last entry in his diary, "The end cannot be far." November 12, 1912. Captain Falcon's diary and body found in Antarctica. The symbol of following someone full-heartedly till death. The goal being tied to the Jurassic Park comms means I can decode that and see the larger push of the time. Note the differences between the book and film. That the original version had the owner Hammond as a villain who obtained investment by revealing miniature elephants, that's a derogatory symbol for Republicans equals Bush/Reagan. In the original version he died as a greedy evil man. In the movie however he is turned into a sympathetic hero that simply didn't understand the dangers he was working with. This gets to how Bush lost. I go over this frequently, but it was MK Ultra murders and scare tactics and other things, Bush gave up, and around 1992 when that happened the comms like Jurassic Park, 1993, switched to paint the transition of power in ways that would soothe those that lost. Trying to make peace as Clinton took over the country. My post titled Natural Disasters has more on that. This doesn't make Bush necessarily a hero or villain, but it does show that Clinton was a takeover. Nintendo played a role in this by pushing against the economic foundations that were supporting Bush. These include Atari, Bushnell, and others that Nintendo crushed. It's a long story I'm still figuring out. When the Mossad faction surrendered, it meant there was a time period of comms that were cooperative between them. I've identified several properties belonging to each. Mossad, for example, being tied to Yahoo and CIA being tied to Google. That's why this is an interesting one. June 26, 2000. Google adopted by Yahoo as primary search provider. June 26, 2000. Scientists complete rough draft of human genome, meets intense scientific fanfare. One of the major symbols of DNA is in the cataloging the massive numbers in a sequence. February 25, 1996. Bermuda Principles Foundation Human Genome Sequencing Hugo. February 27, 1996. Pokémon Red Green Yellow Gen IJPN, top-selling media franchise of all time. Every game being tied to cataloging hundreds of monsters in a Pokédex. Note Pokémon's origins: Pokeball invented due to drugging a monkey into a coma. Pokémon's developer's first Nintendo game was Yoshi. Note the way Yoshi eats: Mario punches him in the head to get him to eat more and more. That head punch is canon, as you can see below. There's also a famous video game section where Yoshi does something approximating LSD. There's also the sequel Yoshi's Cookie. Eating more and more candy. I suspect Yoshi ties into TMNT, which is why he's green. Yoshi being Splinter's original name. September 30, 1983. Nintendo Entertainment Analysis Development founded. Almost all famous early games like Mario Bros. Came from this branch of Nintendo. September 30, 1983. Mirage Studios founded, creator of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The point being, the same entities are tied to promotion of the biggest properties. TMNT was the biggest kids show of the time, with Nintendo being the biggest toy. There is surely crossover in media heritage, and that is reflected in both being founded the same day. Note Yoshi is a dinosaur that is also related to a turtle with a shell on its back with a master with a secret name of Yoshi. Another game by the Pokemon guys for Nintendo. A Lemmings-style game with a mouse. Perhaps tied into the early promotion of computers. Pokemon is specifically tied to that, as it teaches kids to connect devices together to trade Pokemon. That was the original idea behind the game. Russia is also strongly tied to Nintendo indirectly with the Seattle Mariners. Check last post for more on that. Though they also have a direct link with the famous Tetris story. How it was taken from Ghislaine Maxwell's father and given to Nintendo. June 6, 1984. Video game Tetris is first released. June 4, 1984. D.N.A. cloned from an extinct quagga. August 12, 1883. Last quagga death. August 27, 1883. Loudest sound in history, Krakatoa. Note the name of the man tied to it. Rus plus Cell, IA, Higuchi Rus plus Japan. Since we have been talking about Nintendo, there's also Sega. Did you know Sega sponsored a famous show with a plot about DNA and evolution called Neon Genesis Evangelion? It literally has Sega products in both show and film. Neon Sega Genesis Evangelion. I looked into it this week because it has a plot line tying into evolution. In fact, when I looked at the release dates, I noticed a few that matched up. Evangelion matching up with Helix. January 10, 2014. Evangelion 3.0 You Can Not Redo. January 10, 2014. Helix, D.N.A. I won't be decoding either of these as this find was towards the end of my post work, but just wanted to add it somewhere as these release dates are often timed to one another. The show's premise is that giant indestructible angels destroy cities, and they can only be stopped by 3 specific 14-year-olds that can pilot a giant biological robot. This is not a unique premise, but what is unique compared to most of the others is that without comms this show makes no sense in context of character motivations, but I'll get to that. Note the project for these giant robots is funded by the UN. The first episode begins with a girl from this organization tracking the son of another member. She lured him with what amounts to a promise of sex via a postcard with not just a kiss, but an arrow pointed to her cleavage with a wink. This is one of many shows that promotes MK Ops, but unlike most of them the secret affiliations are not hidden in the same. This girl works for the United Nations, and they employ the main character to fight to the death for them. All of it is unusually blunt. Normally all of this is told in comms, but the traumatic childhood of the main character is blunt, and note father watching him over many screens, comms of surveillance. Before we get into how and why, let's briefly cover the backstory. Note the villains are foretold by the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is interesting because April 7, 1948, who formed? +4, Japanese word for death. April 11, 1948, Dead Sea Scrolls announced found. April 26, 1948, 3 Dead Sea Scrolls announced at Hebrew University. Unquestionably the greatest manuscript find of modern times. April 27, 1948, Akira Kurosawa, Drunken Angel, Doctor plus Drunken Yakuza Story. MK Ops funding/coordination worldwide, and back in the earliest days it was done with alcohol. Getting someone drunk and then convincing them to go and murder someone that was a problem or to wreck a place. Regardless, this fits into Neon Genesis Evangelion. Note the place Shinji moves into. The one characteristic of it is that there's beer everywhere and bad food. His caretaker is constantly tempting him, oh and there's a penguin. Penguin Linux spying. Gnomes OS. How else do they program kids to become killers? Production of Neon Genesis Evangelion started in 1993. What was the most popular game console that year? That'd either be the SNES which just came out or the Neon Genesis Evangelion. Right in the title. Otherwise called the Mega Plus Driving. The Hedgehog Dilemma, which is a title of an episode. When you watch it with this understanding you realize what's being symbolized in training is the years of repetitive order following to shoot that video games train into a person. Look at that image closely. He does whatever he's told as he pulls the trigger as desired every time. Just like video games. Combine that with sex temptations and getting drunk, and what do you have? Note she is constantly promoting drinking more beer to a minor. To wake up every morning with one. The point is in weakening inhibitions to get to fight. This is why around the same time as this show Sega introduced a mascot of an unbeatable karate/judo master that would attack anyone that didn't buy a Sega Saturn. This mascot turned Sega's fortunes around in Japan as it went from far behind in sales to neck and neck with the Sony PlayStation for much of its life. This surge in popularity represents what can be purchased by advocating for the MK Ops. One commercial for him involved bringing presents as Santa, as anyone that signs on for brainwash gets perks. Reconcile with Simpsons' first episode with Santa's Little Helper. Shinji is a perfect representation of that world as he is portrayed as unable to make friends and getting bullied. This is one of the reasons the plot makes no sense without comms. The main character is portrayed as having 100% freedom to leave at any time and he does so several times. This is a universe where half the population has been killed and the only one that can save the rest is this one kid. Yet there is no effort outside psychological abuse to get him to do anything. They have him eat bad food and live in a filthy place with a woman that is constantly berating him for things and tempting him to run away. What kind of sense does it make to find the one person who can save your life and then do everything in your power to make them feel worthless? It only makes sense if the goal is not to have him accept his role but instead to literally turn him into a lunatic. And a lunatic is exactly what he is. Note his expression as he pilots the giant robot. He goes from panic to robotic to enraged and then stabs with his giant robot knife. This happens in several of the fights. Just before this the umbilical cable is severed. This with comms is perhaps a reference to someone who is being housed in a place and then going out/running away. Being untethered from mother. I can imagine they would use lingo like this in the same way while tracking MK subjects. The symbolism of someone deciding to kill. Without the support it's a countdown of sorts as they have no food/money and are a ticking time bomb. The appearance of the giant robot itself symbolizes the technical monstrosity behind the brainwash. His reaction to the idea of dying. Apathy towards it. There's no effort to help him psychologically, or at least in any way that would make sense. If he chooses not to pilot then they constantly threaten that they will make an injured girl do it instead. One would think a pilot should be treated like a hero based on its own rules, but instead the root of Shinji's psychological issues is his father's irrational disappointment of him. This is magnified due to his father caring for the other pilot to the extent he injures himself in an effort to help her. Just like with them guilting him into piloting, these psychological games are all representative of the kinds of psyops done on children to turn them into murderers. To play children against one another and make them feel jealous. The screw-up gets placed in front of games, drugs, beer, to waste their life while every effort is made to feel meaningless until they develop a frustration that can explode. The sibling is usually in on it and as such attempts are made to lay landmines for them, to create embarrassing situations. They can magnify the trauma by agreeing with whatever abuse has been inflicted. A father who psychologically abuses a son is called bad and then getting slapped for it. After a child experiences endless psychological torment it creates a suggestive state. A state where they are open to influence allowing programming. This is literally Shinji's defining feature as he is constantly told he always does what he is told. This is precisely why he goes dead-eyed and then berserk doing as told as if it were a video game. With bad food, sex, and alcohol temptations, along with trauma at every angle it's a perfect storm to fragment a mind. These kinds of victims are used to create more victims by sending them to explode against an enemy. For example, they can be sent to shoot up a business associated with whoever is being problematic, or to create a distraction, or one of many other uses. Just by itself the MK world ensures loyalty and allows participants to demonstrate loyalty while removing any chance they would have too many kids and too many members. For successful brainwashing they long prepare activations and the press can then turn it into the biggest story of the year. This is why this one episode has them root all the power of Japan to the robot. Another character, Langley, CIA symbolism. Note red shoes and red mech. First thing you see of this 14-year-old is her accidentally exposing herself as someone films it. The symbolism here is educational. Note after she exposes herself the guy exposes himself to her. The symbolism here is the connection between blackmail ops and MK Ultra. Note her first episode they go fishing and she takes the red suit and jumps around various UN/military battleships. The same symbol was used by Maxwell as the UN summit. Note the 1.717 com for cost of tuna. Langley, character, note focus on film when introduced and undressing. It fits into MK Ops as one of the ways they drive subjects is with women. Having a girl create circumstances to drive him into doing something that will create shame. She plays games with him, as this is what will make him obsess over her and then has him dress up in embarrassing outfits and put in situations where he can be exposed and ridiculed. This ties into the non-MK Ops as well in a way that's particularly educational. Note this episode declaring, 17, secure line, and they find a pupil stage of an enemy to capture. How does capture work? Blackmail. They dive into a volcano and capture a newborn angel. When this fails they switch to murder and note specifically Shinji has to throw his knife to her. Him having to give her his knife after her failure to catch clarifies that they symbolize different operations, but the most importantly we learn here is that if a blackmail capture fails what happens next? They switch from blackmail to MK. Switch to Shinji the lunatic with a knife. It paints how it's viewed when infiltrated. That if someone that is comms aware comes into their territory and doesn't play ball, they are fair game to terrorize until they do. Anyway, hope you've noticed all the 17 comms, as there are more in practically every episode after Langley shows up. Art 017, top left. A giant spider with eye spies on them. They assert they fight angels because they are attacked. That is a point I've been trying to clarify for some time, who attacks who and whether it's mutual. 17 showers bottom middle. 3 children getting nude and taking 17 showers to get clean. The caretaker is poor, top left, which I remind you someone the entire fate of the world rests on and is routinely ordering around people who are the highest ranking military figures in the countries they visit. How on earth can they suggest such a person would be paid poorly? Especially when they eat nothing but the cheapest food, which they usually burn. D.17 Declaration, an ocean of blood in the Dead Sea, and a satellite eye spying. Note the conversation between Shinji and Asuka top left. That despite constantly being in pain she mocks him for being coddled and treated like a baby. That he needs people to be meaner to him. That she says he is, in the womb, is especially meaningful as his giant robot is said to be powered by his dead mother. She died in 1977 equals origin of Q clearance. The fact that his robot is defined as his dead mother likely symbolizes the attacks being hers. If someone decides to sacrifice a child into becoming a giant monster, how would you symbolize the monster? The logical choice is having that character be represented in the monster. It is in fact them acting after all. The child did not choose to be molded into the monster. That path was laid out for him by the mother, which is why it makes perfect sense to have the monster be symbolized with her. This follows a similar logic to superhero comms, as I've found some that represent the power a rich individual has over the masses. Representing in their superpowers the way a steering of public opinion can be used to enact great change. Let's pause on one comm briefly as it is particularly meaningful. Fly Me to the Moon. Every episode of Evangelion ends with a different version of Fly Me to the Moon. This song was also a key song from Squid Game. A reader tipped me off to the fact that Frank Sinatra also sang Send in the Clowns, which is a song associated with the movie released on the same day the lunar experiments were shut down by NASA. September 30, 1977. A Little Night Music, Send in the Clowns. September 30, 1977. Moon experiments turned off due to lack of funding. Though that is interesting, I want to focus on the Fly Me to the Moon right now. What does it mean for someone to ask someone else to fly them to the moon? What does it mean to play among the stars? What does it mean to see Jupiter and Mars? Why is someone asking someone to do these things? Outside the ending credits they play the song only one time. A scene where the drunken girl with authority over Shinji talks about her career choices. She took a job as a UN agent where her father worked. Drunkenly confessing that she's a hypocrite to insult Shinji when she is just as in denial as he is. As bad as Shinji, because insulting him is what people do. She also feels she may be using her friend. That is a logical fear to have when her entire job is to cooperate with others in manipulating Shinji into having mental breakdowns. What's really meaningful here is her juxtaposition of this scene with the next. Juxtapose this career discussion to what Shinji and Asuka are doing. Asuka convinces him to kiss her while thinking about his dead mother's anniversary. She then repeatedly shows revulsion at him. This is one of many small psyops that build up over time. All to make them feel bad about themselves. Small things like this aren't illegal, but it will have a profound effect on a disturbed individual. It'd have quite an effect on a regular kid, but someone being conditioned into being a murderer. Yeah, this kind of thing when combined with the other abuses will literally drive them insane. Now reconcile that with the MK world she is abusing him as a job. They record the subject, Penguin/Linux, and what happens to the footage? Fly Me to the Moon equals person is recorded, and they are flown to the moon. Footage is digitally flown into the sky by satellite. Let Me Play Among the Stars equals starring in footage. Let me see what spring is like on a Jupiter and Mars equals Jupiter equals government, UN employment. Mars equals invasion. Goal of MK. In other words, hold my hand, please let me have this job. Return to the juxtaposed scenes. The "fly me to the moon" scene discussed earlier, implying this was the kind of job she did and felt guilty about while drunk. Reconcile Mars with Rocket Man. Elton John, Mars ain't the kind of place to raise your kids. And there's no one there to raise them if you did. No one to raise your kids. Exactly how Shinji has no parental figure. This lack of good guidance and only bad guidance is crucial. Plausible deniability is important, and while parents involved do involve themselves in creating trauma, the heavy lifting is done by a contractor. Kids like Asuka, classmates and neighbors. Note the Rocket Man song is tied to North Korea as Trump used it to address NK's leader. North Korea's most famous piece of media I know of is a 1977 hedgehog. Like Sega. Psychological issues with abandonment and conditioned responses. He asserts he practiced the cell every day despite not liking it or getting better because nobody told him to stop. And Asuka is always telling him that everyone is going too easy on him, trying to make him hate himself more and more. The few times in the show he is praised, it is only so that he gets knocked down, like in this scene where he flexes his muscle after being told he was strong and a couple of children laugh at him, sending him into depression. Little ops like that to bring him up to smash him down. Origin of Evangelion robots said to be copied, which implies not taking ownership of this but instead using a playbook designed by others. The father explicitly states that if Shinji knew the truth he would hate him forever. That only Asuka in the red shoes will have good things happen to them. But they need children like this as it ensures survival. Keeping them in holding patterns for activation. There's a lot more I could go into here. This idea of keeping a maniac ready for deployment whenever an example is made. Note the imagery of the robot. Or how Shinji's caretaker has the initials MK, top right. It's easier for me to identify MK comms, but this show has an equal amount of sex with a context of children. I can even get very precise in defining the symbolism of Rei Ayanami. Rei equals Ray Chandler. Same pronunciation. In this case it's a girl used for abuse. This explains why the father of Shinji obsesses over her. In the film he molests her by sticking his hand into her breast and moving it to her crotch. There is nudity, so I won't put that screenshot up. Though from this sequence above, which has Rei being strangled by a jealous woman, you can understand. It's not just jealousy of him spending time with a child, but the child explicitly states the father prefers her over the old hag. The excuse for this creepy pedophilia is that Rei is a clone made from Shinji's mother's D.N.A. Which gets us into the D.N.A. and evolution parts of the show. Notice above the Christ imagery with the many human legs sticking out from the nailed-on angel, the symbolism here seems to be of many people working as one. In the show there are these wars between one faction of 17 giant angels, and Nerve, which uses the blood of a nailed-up angel to create giant fighting robots. The imagery of that nailed-up angel with the many human legs has its roots in the Catholic Church, as the infiltration into a country and coordination across great distances make up the origins of the modern iterations of the CIA/UN. The difference between the two is that one takes its orders from a central figure, while the other, which portrays itself as more of a voluntary collaboration between many cells across great distances. The conflict arising from a disagreement of autonomy and an awareness that letting the foreign, alien, cells take root would lead to the eventual takeover of all the existing domestic cells. The evolution part of it is tied into the eating of the forbidden fruit, which is what the angel provides in the show. Gaining knowledge allows human evolution beyond the masses of sheep. In literal terms, people learn how to elevate themselves into a higher position, evolve, by coordinating with other like-minded agents. Controlling aspects of media and government ensures job success. The chosen way to fight the foreign cells is of course sending brainwashed people to kick them out. The ultimate version of this is deploying a lunatic prime to attack. A lunatic conditioned by those trying to evolve and find a higher place in society. The collection of cells that make up alliance funding and rewarding those that engage in that behavior. Asuka is one such character, but she also is tied to blackmailing. Blackmail is given to new members so as to avoid defections. Her final battle. Asuka's final battle involves the song Hallelujah playing as she screams about getting violated. Note the most popular version of the song is tied to a history of sex. Directly after Asuka gets violated, the character in command of the project begins focusing on how her cat just died. Since the cat died, obviously Asuka gets replaced with the final pilot. Shinji couldn't drive the red mech, but this character can. Originally this character was to be a cat controlling a boy. Bottom right in image above. A boy who is entirely friendly to Shinji and talks him into sleeping together. We then learn he is designated as the 17th and final angel. This leads to Shinji being asked to murder him, which he does as he always follows orders. Tonal shift. Let's take a step back. So the girl who was attached to red shoes, cats, sex symbolism and was always teasing Shinji about being attracted to her was replaced. She was replaced by a boy also attached to cat symbolism, and far more than any other character in the series tries to seduce Shinji. He literally gets him into a bath and then bed with a clear indication of sexual overtones. He was also the first person who ever said they liked Shinji, yet in spite of that Shinji kills him to follow orders. I believe this boy fits the most common kind of severe victim I'm aware of that wasn't represented thus far. They had MK boy, sex-abused girl, willing blackmail girl, so they just needed sex-abused boy. Like many of the psyops shown throughout the show, I suspect his death was likely based on a real event. The enemy, Angel, is just whatever is defined as one, as it includes humans several times in the show. Try and translate what we see in relation to IRL. Think about what would happen if you put together two boys with these specific kinds of abuses. Shinji is desperate for emotional affection, desperate for friendship and intimacy. He has been conditioned to be ashamed of being babyish as well as girly. Like when he was forced to wear a matching girl's outfit to dance with Asuka. He also becomes psychotically enraged and murderous when triggered. Combine that with another boy who has been so sexually abused they only know how to show their affection through it. What would happen if those two characters were put together? An explosive situation. I suspect situations like this have happened specifically to discard a boy that got too old. Or if they don't adapt to cult life and rebel against it. Especially given the explosive nature of their accusations to the powerful. So yeah, I think that's the idea. That he was defined as target and Shinji dutifully followed orders. Though this is speculation. Then the show goes inside Shinji's head for the last 2 episodes. How do you end a series with a main character that symbolizes someone being tortured psychologically? The answer the author seems to have come to is to unravel the psychological knots. Shinji is a character that does whatever he is told to do and desperately wants approval. This is an intentional psychosis created from a young age, and in the final episode he realizes there was another way his story could have gone. He imagines a life where he has 2 normal parents instead of an abusive father and dead mother. Additionally, Asuka wakes him up every day and defends him from psychological attackers instead of tormenting him. This helps him come to realize for the first time that maybe everyone doesn't hate him and that he can start to be himself instead of what everyone else wants him to be. The motive for writing the ending this way is hard to guess. The official explanation is that this ending is everyone in the world merging into one being, which I suspect is symbolism for how after a successful MK deployment they unify the public in a news story. Ops to herd everyone in one direction. All of society merging as one opinion is a perfect symbol of what the news tries to do by framing a news event to evoke a specific reaction. This show also had an ending movie which I only skimmed as this post is overdue. The movie used scenes of trauma like the kiss scene with Asuka, but then it escalates it to new heights of humiliation. He calls them out as lying about ever being nice to him. MK ops involve kids being set up to torture one another. It's tragic on many levels. Think about that, being a child and having your parents set you to bully a psychologically traumatized boy or girl. I can't say they are innocent of wrongdoing, but the true evil is in the system. The final point I want to make is that one of the primary characters of the nerve agency that tracks/prepares Shinji is voiced by the same person who does the voice of Nico Robin in One Piece. That may not mean much to you, but One Piece is the biggest manga that's ever existed, and Nico Robin is perhaps the most plot-central character of that show. A character who, just like in Neon Genesis, helps run a massive terrorist organization. One that deploys various criminals to help take over a country. This character is a surprise turn and becomes one of the main characters. Note her superpower, which is sprouting body parts on any surface she chooses. This is the same as the angel at the heart of Nerve, which is made up of many human legs into the form of a giant crucified angel. Nico Robin commonly summons a giant not unlike the angel made up of countless body parts. There are a few major implications of this, so I've decoded One Piece in my post titled Anime from back in June. The main part of the show is built on the symbolism of turning MK ops docile. The show exists as a cheap solution to psyops. This is why it begins with a kid trying to prove how tough he is by doing something dangerous and stupid. The dangerous kid is the problem and the manga is the solution. How? It uses philosophy to correct the behavior. It's very different from Dragon Ball, which encouraged fights. The very first story involves not resorting to violence until your life is in danger. To never use violence just because someone said something mean. It became the most popular thing ever in Japan, specifically because there was a push to pacify the youth of the country, which had been slowly becoming more brainwashed and steered into violence. Check my anime post for more on that, because there's a lot more that I won't get into here. I bring this up because July 19, 1997, end of Evangelion, conclusion to Evangelion story. July 22, 1997, One Piece begins, the biggest manga to date. Movie was titled and marketed as The End of Evangelion. And was timed to the beginning of One Piece, which also symbolized the pacification of those ops. So this helps verify not just my decodes of One Piece but also puts Evangelion into greater clarity. Notice someone triggered a 14-year-old child murderer to coincide with the first Evangelion movie. March 15, 1997, Neon Genesis Evangelion, 14-year-old, child murderer plot. March 16, 1997. Child murderer, 14-year-old, kills 10-year-old in murder spree, lasts until just before One Piece begins. Of course this doesn't mean those ops end, as it's all cell-based. You can't just wave a hand and have tons of people with different motives all agree to the same thing. We can't know for sure, but Nico Robin symbolism joining One Piece may have been indicative of a few penguins joining, i.e. computer users tied into surveillance. October 20, 2005. Neon Genesis Evangelion US release date, Penguin. +4. October 24, 2005. Club Penguin. Next, let's take a break to go over a new sports decode. We'll return to D.N.A-based comms afterwards. Jackie Roosevelt Robinson, 42. This was a random find as I dug this week, but it's interesting. Marriages are often used to cement multiple parties joining hands. February 10, 1946. Jackie Roosevelt Robinson married, first black pro baseball player. February 8, 1946. Central Intelligence Group, CIA precursor, activated. February 8, 1946. NK Soviet administration. Tied to CIA. September 17, 1947. Robinson named Rookie of the Year. September 18, 1947. CIA founded. What was the first pro-black player a symbol of? Note who he was named after. Teddy Roosevelt. January 31, 1919. Jackie Roosevelt Robinson born became the first African American to play named after Teddy Roosevelt. January 6, 1919, Teddy Roosevelt death in sleep. A transition of ops. Let's consider the rest of his name. What does Robinson symbolize when tied to adding a new kind of ally, black man, to an existing team, white? Ever hear of Robinson Crusoe? A major plot point in that story is of his befriending a black savage from Africa who then helps him kill other savages. This tells us the symbolism is for making allies in new territory. Symbol of converting a savage to an ally. How are allies made? What did Teddy Roosevelt symbolize? January 6, 1919, Teddy Roosevelt death at age 60 died in sleep. January 8, 1919, Teddy Roosevelt funeral. Plus 17. January 25, 1919, world's largest hotel opens in Manhattan, project. Teddy Roosevelt symbolism is tied to blackmail with children at hotels. Note South Park using his image to represent the origin of cult-based child molestation. Check other recent posts if that's new to you. People who die are often used for symbolism, and given his symbolism was tied to sedated children used for blackmail. I suspect his death during sleep was used in the newspapers to send messaging about a transition in those ops. This ties into the biggest hotel in the world opening 17 days later. Given hotel symbolism tied to blackmail, especially in context of Teddy Roosevelt, and Manhattan symbolism tied to blackmail, I find it unlikely a coincidence. In my nuclear post I explain how blackmail with kids is the symbol for uranium-based nuclear weaponry. This is why there is Manhattan symbolism above. January 24, 1950, Jackie Roosevelt Robinson signs the highest contract, $35,000 in Dodger history. Plus 7, 777. January 31, 1950, Jackie Roosevelt Robinson birthday. January 31, 1950, President Truman announces the beginning of the development of a hydrogen bomb. Symbol of massive funding of Teddy Ops tied to the first hydrogen nuclear bomb. March 18, 1942, J. Roosevelt Robinson plus Moreland allowed to work out with pro baseball team equals begins integration. March 18, 1942, Japan Roosevelt internment order. Interesting. Robinson began as a com by being allowed to work out with the pro team. However, it wasn't just him. A man named Moreland was with him. And it was the same day FDR signed the order to take control over everyone of Japanese descent. Confiscating land, as in the point of internment. This is particularly interesting because when I decoded Teddy Roosevelt and blackmail, it was Japan that acted as the interim. Judo/Seattle. This implies FDR took control of the Japanese populations because he had been made aware that some of them had strings on politicians. This blunt takeover tied to Jackie Robinson also may explain something interesting. Jackie Roosevelt Robinson was player 42. If Jackie Roosevelt Robinson symbolized forced takeovers, then answer to everything, 42. I think this explains that joke in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A story written by a man with the initials D.N.A. The joke being the answer is 42. But you have to find the question. Get it? Because the answer is you need to take out your enemies. You need to pull up 42, a Jackie Robinson/FDR play, and simply round up everyone involved. That's the answer. But, what is the question? How do you justify telling the police to go and round up everyone you don't like? Hence the joke. The answer is absolute power, but how in the heck do you justify using it? Also of note. March 8, 1978, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by D.N.A. March 10, 1978, Incredible Hulk Hitchhiker famous origin. I may decode it in the future as I'm not positive what it means, but two famous hitchhiking symbols hit the same day. Given this was right after 1977, the most likely answer is there were displaced individuals tied to brainwashing that were hitching a ride. So both the book and show acted as some kind of promo for it. Well, anyway. Let's return to Jackie Roosevelt Robinson. Another interesting potential connection is with China. Jackie Robinson became the figurehead of Rookie of the Year in 1987. Same day martial law ends in Taiwan, which is interesting that entire prolonged 40-year martial law began at the same time Jackie Robinson's career began. Literally the Rookie of the Year. February 27, 1947. February 28 incident Chinese protest/massacre leads to martial law. April 15, 1947. Jackie Robinson first black man pro baseball. July 14, 1987. Martial law ends Taiwan. July 14, 1987. Jackie Robinson Rookie of the Year renamed. Read that carefully above because that is an impossible coincidence. Given the symbolism of Rookie is key, it's worth noting that Ken Griffey Jr. led the charge to make that happen. April 15, 1997. Jackie Robinson's 42 retired across all of baseball thanks to Ken Griffey Jr. April 14, 1997. Albright announced to attend Hong Kong transfer ceremony. July 1, 1997. Handover of Hong Kong. If you remember my decodes of Mariners Ken Griffey Jr. as it relates to Japan, Nintendo owned Mariners. August 28, 1945. Jackie Robinson famous meeting with Mahatma, baseball's great experiment. August 30, 1945. Liberation Day Hong Kong from Japanese rule. Retiring the same day the Eisenhower Doctrine began. He was to be traded for Dick Littlefield, but instead Jackie Roosevelt Robinson went off to sell nuts and coffee. Teddy Roosevelt was Maxwell House most famous patron. January 5, 1957. Eisenhower Doctrine. January 5, 1957. Jackie Robinson retires after trade to Giants from Dodgers to sell coffee, chock full o' nuts. This tells me there was a disagreement, and the people running the blackmail cells weren't going to cooperate fully with Eisenhower. This may help explain Lord of the Rings symbolism I go over in recent posts tied to him. As the blackmail tied into that control. I suspect part of his symbolism was in going dark with blackmail. This is why perhaps he agreed to drop white players from group. Symbol of everyone staying hidden. October 1, 1953. Playboy founded. October 8, 1953. Jackie Robinson drops white players from team after demands. Some of those last ones I still need to research further. Sports is among my weakest subjects, but it's a popular request, so I didn't want to leave it out. Let's switch back to D.N.A. Genome project complete. When I was digging into D.N.A. dates. April 14, 2003. Postal 2 legendary controversial game killing kids legacy humor. April 14, 2003. Human genome declared complete despite only 85%. April 14, 2003. Star Wars Kid Ghislaine Raza Golf Ball Retriever Meme P2P. Note for that famous Star Wars Kid video. Uploaded via Kazaa footage of Raza. Kazaa/Raza. March 2001. Kazaa start. March 2001. Celebrity Big Brother start. April 14, 2003. Postal 2 legendary controversial game killing kids legacy humor. April 14, 2003. Human genome declared complete despite only 85%. April 14, 2003. Star Wars Kid Ghislaine Raza Golf Ball Retriever Meme P2P. November 26, 2006. Kazaa Final. November 27, 2006. Big Brother Final. As for what this means. Note his first name. Ghislaine/Ghislaine as in Epstein and Maxwell. Symbolism of a bullied kid making a fool of himself on video tied to file sharing. Seems to suggest comms of MK footage being moved. The human genome connection in this case being the foundation for file sharing. Kazaa/BitTorrent and such being transitioned. A couple more D.N.A. animes before we can get to the most important part. Updates. D.N.A. 2. In case you've forgotten the basic symbol of D.N.A., it's in the blueprint. The building blocks. Here is an anime called D.N.A. 2. A show about a future with a population problem that can only be fixed by operating on the DNA of a loser to make sure he doesn't become attractive to girls. A woman tracking a loser in order to modify his DNA to make him stay a loser. The goal of reducing the population problem by modifying his DNA. I suspect the meaning here is in pushing pornography on the masses of youth. A mega playboy being just like the Dolly Parton comms. Pushing men into pornography. Suddenly getting hundreds of women equals suddenly being introduced to pornography. This modifies his DNA because now he's addicted to it. Thus solving the population crisis as he will no longer be looking for girls and thereby having kids. Note above the very first episode involves him desperately wanting to watch an adult video. Reconcile with the internet suddenly offering it up by the truckload. The story begins with him being led on by a pretty girl causing him to vomit. Symbolism of being forced to say something embarrassing. This, as it turns out, was all a joke played on him by a girl who thinks he is a loser. Comms of psychological abuse much like Neon Genesis but tailored to the populace rather than someone raised from birth to be brainwashed. I think the main thing is pushing pornography addiction, and the vehicle for doing that involved psychological abuse. Jurassic Park was also DNA focused, and I noticed this. June 1993, Jurassic Park film. August 1993, D.N.A. 2 manga. October 7, 1994, D.N.A. 2 anime series. October 4, 1994, Jurassic Park Universal Studios home video. Could be coincidence, but I do suspect both were tied into a larger push about DNA. Jurassic Park itself tied to the computer revolution. And of course that is connected to the internet. So we could view the two as tied to the larger tech push going on to modify blueprints. One more DNA-based anime. A recent one. BMA. In the 2020 Netflix show BMA, the story is focused on differences between animal people and humans. Beast people get overloaded with stress and turn into violent monsters due to violent beast genes. We are being given an excuse for why a certain group of individuals are different from another group. In BMA, the beast men largely grow up oppressed and in poverty. The premise of the show being a human girl suddenly turned into a beast man tanuki. A mythical creature with magical testes. It's hard to be sure, but I suspect the symbolism is in how people's development has been modified by the internet. The dolphin beast man, for example, who is obsessed with posting herself on social media. Leading to nearly being drowned by her fans. With giant magical testicles, the symbolism for the main character being a tanuki would represent the pornography industry targeting children. In that sense it's a counter to the like of that DNA show. Which may explain why early on it involves a bunch of children being captured. Capturing children in the act leading to arrests. This may be something that has been going on behind the scenes. The villain's motive in the show is to get beast men to attack one another. Perhaps like social media conditions people to do. The villain asserts he is creating a cure. But it's all a psyop to get them to rampage. There's another plot line in the film about how the villain sacrificed 1,000 beast men to achieve evolution. That the world is ruled by those that sacrifice to evolve and control it from the shadows. Many of these recent shows have had comms that imply a major change has been going on away from the sacrifice systems of the past. I believe BMA is one such program. I also believe there are many comms going on literally as I write this that are also about this. So let's get into those. Updates: FIFA, Kanye, Musk, crypto, Gene/Gene. Last week I barely scratched the surface of a major comm I'm going to now break open. Specifically, I highlighted comms going on about genes. November 24, 2022. Trump, sued by Gene Carroll. November 23, 2022. Musk, ask genes. November 22, 2022. Kanye, wearing jeans. At the time I was able to gather it was connected to law enforcement. Note the symbol used with hammer jeans sent by Musk. Now it's crystal clear. Notice the umbrella in the Wikipedia picture for Gene. Umbrellas are protection. Note in the article on the left about Trump and Gene lawsuits, they decided to use an umbrella to represent Trump. What happens in a court of law? What would be protected against? Being cuffed. This is why in 2017 a message was made of throwing away an umbrella in relation to Russia. That, at the time, Mueller was coming for Trump with the law. Why then is Trump being sued? Why is Kanye self-destructing? It's the loudest possible way to send a message of, "This could be you." That's why crypto leaders are disappearing. November 28, 2022. Cryptocurrency co-founder Tian Cullender dies, unexpectedly, aged 30, weeks after another digital money millionaire drowned on Puerto Rico beach. October 29, 2022. Paranoid, crypto millionaire drowns in Puerto Rico after tweeting that CIA and Mossad were after him. Families say no foul play, but friends are suspicious about his sudden death. Whatever protection was promised is vanishing. That's why FIFA World Cup mascot is a ghost. From an alternate universe trying to communicate with humans for centuries. Responsible for many iconic moments in sports. It's not just about legal protection. This is about fame and voices. This is all leading towards something big. With Twitter controlled by Musk, it means stories can be spread of anyone in non-compliance. This ties into what Kanye has been doing. Antisemitism. Giving an example of what will be lost if things go public. $1 billion lost. Look at a small section of the headlines of him being torn down. Each one a broadcast of This Is You Next. Look at the timetable for confirmation. No way is it a coincidence that Adidas D.N.A deal begins and ends with Nazi plus Twitter plus Kanye. August 30, 2019, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey hacked plus sending pro-Nazi messages. +4. September 3, 2019, Qatar 2022 World Cup logo debut, D.N.A. September 12, 2022, Kanye West says he's done making corporate deals. September 15, 2022, Kanye West seeks to pull plug on billion-dollar Gap deal. September 2022, Kanye West asserts he is done making deals with Adidas, Soccer, and Gap. Nazi propaganda timed to FIFA Adidas with the D.N.A logo timed to Kanye Adidas. Notice with Kanye's Adidas deal, before he self-destructed he explicitly stated that he was ending partnerships due to substantial non-compliance. Note his complaint, "I was on mute or something," as in certain parties weren't cooperating when asked. Those parties are now in the crosshairs. This has been planned for years. Notice that D.N.A Helix logo of FIFA World Cup. Note Amazon Helix Tower. Started building its Helix Tower for $13K. The concept of collecting everyone's data with Google, but not just Google. As for the D.N.A part, notice Facebook new logo. Meta, like metadata. Metadata equals the most useful way to track people. Double helix equals D.N.A, all of these stories began around the same time. October 4, 2020, Google Ascension deal, millions of files of patients' data. February 2, 2021. Amazon Helix Tower unveiled for $13K employees. February 25, 2021. Google Ascension expands. October 28, 2021. Facebook renames to Meta, Data. Remember Ascension Stringer? Stringer equals future event. All of these companies are noted as tracking as well. Not just tracking, but note in several posts that they connect with each other with the data. Here's another tracking comm I found this week. July 14, 2008. Dark Knight, cell phone tracking to catch terrorist story. July 14, 2008. iPhone App Store officially becomes massive success, billion-dollar industry within months. The film involves tracking people precisely using phones. Same day the iPhone App Store launched. Given Apple's history, I find that very suspicious. The most interesting thing is what's happened the last couple of years. The heads of Amazon and Twitter exiting is highly meaningful, in fact it's tied to deaths and COVID as well. I've frequently talked about the flips, and this is most evident when major figures step down. February 2, 2021. 13K employee, Helix Tower at $2.5 billion headquarters. Amazon's unveils plans. February 2, 2021. 13 million DC to pay to buy out the city's most notorious Wendy's location. February 2, 2021. Bezos announces retirement suddenly. February 2, 2021. Report, Durham's CIA investigation finished last year, focused on FBI now. February 2, 2021. Rush Limbaugh final broadcast. February 2, 2021. SpaceX, Elon Musk warns of civilization collapse if we don't leave Earth soon. Limbaugh, who got sick the same day COVID came, stepped down the same day Jeff Bezos did, as well as the Helix going up. I believe both leaving represented both sides disarming their biggest guns with an agreement to cooperate. January 20, 2020. Rush Limbaugh diagnosed with cancer. January 20, 2020. Coronavirus hits USA confirmed. February 17, 2021. SpaceX, ISS space station docked. February 17, 2021. Rush Limbaugh death. Those that didn't cooperate are now in the crosshairs. The firing squad being old information. This is why so many genes, comms are tied to retro/Y2K and so on. This is telling people whose data they can expect to be released. To look at Kanye and recognize they won't be able to duck what's coming. Kanye is representing the fall from stardom they will feel, and Trump is giving them a preview of the legal battle they face. What's coming is a release of offensive material they had buried. Hard to say the exact form, but most likely it's of the same type as Kanye is presenting. Yesterday I heard someone say that Kanye was speed running the end of his career, so it's incredibly potent that I heard that arbitrarily online. Kanye going around on Alex Jones talking about loving Hitler while wearing a black mask and covered in logos. I need to analyze this more, and I'm sure I'll cover this in future posts more extensively. But my first take on the getup is it's defining being hidden and supported by various companies, logos. Note his net and Yahoo. A symbol I've gone over before, albeit not with an actual fishing net. Benjamin Netanyahu. How much blackmail does Mossad have on celebrities? How much blackmail does CIA have on celebrities? We may find the answer to both of these questions soon. Of course, the only way this could work is if the voice was there for it. How is public opinion crafted? Herding sheep. How would good, or bad, actors coordinate a smear campaign? What kind of symbolism would work for such a thing? Ever hear of a spittoon? Symbol of something you spit on. Insult. If you are familiar with major games, perhaps that name sounds familiar. July 21, 2017, Splatoon 2. August 10, 2017, West of Loathing Spittoon. A video was trending this week at the top of YouTube that began with Markiplier giving a recap of his love for spittoons. I thought to myself, I bet that game came out around the same time as either Splatoon or its sequel. And it did. The Markiplier videos appear to act as promotions for the ops. This is why every spittoon encounter in a game titled Loathing involves a finding treasure inside the most disgusting spittoons in the world. The first of which being a ring, as that symbolizes commitment. The game, on the other hand, is about coordinating teams spraying, spitting, on each other to take over turf. Symbolism perhaps of coordinating flaming. Note it being an official esport tied to pro baseball. This may give us insight as to how sports are used in general terms. A way to coordinate ops that shape public opinion. I've never been clear on the precise structure of those teams. The game acts as a symbol so as to both promote and coordinate. People all across the world agreeing to promote a scandal. Good thing I've decoded Nintendo is on the military side. That means what will be coordinated is the very things I've been discussing. This is probably why there's a new Splatoon game alongside this sequel to the Splatoon game. I'll probably decode all of those in a future post, but this is all great news. If you've paid attention to this post, I feel I should clarify something. The comms they sent in the 80s and 90s make them look like harbingers of bad health and mental illness, but as best I can tell it's rarely the entity itself wants to do evil. This is a massive system, and the ones funding it all would just finance the next name on the list to do the exact same thing. It doesn't justify anything, but it does let us understand how such a thing could persist. One might think then we can blame the Rothschilds, as they would be the top of the line with banks, but even then it's more complicated. This system is global and old. Nobody alive today was involved in setting it up hundreds of years ago. And as I've shown with plenty of comms, anyone that gets out of line becomes the next target of an activated MKUltra or blackmail release. It's a wonderful thing for them, eh? The top of the world managed to design a system of evil where those involved in evil can continue it with a minimum amount of guilt. This bothers me, but then that's why I've said for years now that the true test of character is in the present day. Anyone that won't help tear down the MK system should get the full might of the world that is trying to do good against them. I was MK'd myself, and I'm sure one day that story will be fully told. I mention this here because the truth of my background makes me uniquely able to discuss severe mental illness and how to overcome it. You may have picked up on my rather extreme levels of optimism, and that's the mindset that helped me overcome so many bad things in life. I just want a better world. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I want the people who continue to hurt others to be held accountable for it. I can't begrudge people cooperating with evil when 1,000 guns are pointed at their family, but that time is over. There is no way to make up for what was done to so many people, but a good start would be to let some victims know that they are in fact victims. MKUltra works by tricking people into committing evil. Many still have no idea why they do the things they do. They don't have the mental tools developed to even begin interpreting how they've been driven to such a miserable state. I believe Kanye was MK'd, and much of his work reflects this. His sudden ascent to billionaire status is tied to how important he is to the ops going on right now. I find it incredible that someone with that kind of background would do what he is now. He is intentionally burning all that fan love to the ground to send a message. A message of, "This is you next." Destroying himself so as to make an example of what will happen to others when their own light blackmail becomes public. What do I mean by light? Remember the Access Hollywood tape? Grabbed them by the XXXXX. October 7, 2016. Access Hollywood scandal begins of Donald John Trump. Day before. October 6, 2016. Cable guy breaks funny bone of John. October 6, 2016. Tom Hanks coordinates girl stars to assemble at Normandy to get ready to cook. This was a calm prepping the media, cable guy, for the propaganda onslaught the next day. The goal is to break the funny bone of Trump. I.e., Trump will not able to laugh off this scandal. I decoded this extensively in other posts. The point was that Trump intentionally said offensive things on tape. This was to secure him so that parties involved in promoting Trump to a position of new fame, this was as Apprentice was starting, would feel secure in doing so. Check my intro section for more on that, but the point for here is that many of these celebrities have light blackmail, things that many of them probably don't even think could destroy them, as they've always had the entire media at their back. Is that still true? Who now controls Twitter? Kanye is showing celebrities a preview. He asserted the Adidas deal would end based on not having a voice, so I believe the main issue right now is media figures dragging their feet as good people try and help victims. A preview of what happens to those that don't cooperate, and we are still in the middle of that demonstration. When this demonstration ends, we may just see a new direction for things. If you are in doubt, just remember all the DNA/gene equals gene comms going on right now. The whole reason I made this post was because I recognize the pattern going on right now. Everything is DNA. World Cup. Cooperation around the world. It's just like with COVID. What happened then is still going on to this day. August 27, 2019. NSA, paid sick leave coming, Corona. August 29, 2019. CIA, Pumpkin Spice Latte coming. October 18, 2019. Bill Gates Dark Winter Coronavirus Conference. October 18, 2019. Wuhan World Military Games. November 17, 2019. Wuhan First Case of Coronavirus. Remember above how Rush Limbaugh's death and Jeff Bezos' exit was timed to COVID starting, how Elon Musk gave the signal for both by saying, civilization collapse if we don't leave Earth soon. January 20, 2020. Rush Limbaugh diagnosed with cancer. January 20, 2020. Coronavirus hits USA confirmed. February 2, 2021. 13K employee, Helix Tower at $2.5 billion headquarters. Amazon's unveils plans. February 2, 2021. 13 million DC to pay to buy out the city's most notorious Wendy's location. February 2, 2021. Bezos announces retirement suddenly. February 2, 2021. End of the World War. Musk. February 2, 2021. Hitler's toilet expected to fetch up to $15K at auction. February 2, 2021. Rush Limbaugh final broadcast. February 2, 2021. SpaceX, Elon Musk warns of civilization collapse if we don't leave Earth soon. February 17, 2021. SpaceX, ISS space station docked. February 17, 2021. Rush Limbaugh death. And then there's these. August 30, 2019. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey hacked to send pro-Nazi messages. September 3, 2019. Adidas Qatar 2022 World Cup logo debut, D.N.A shape. September 2022. Kanye West asserts he is done making deals with Adidas. October 2022. Kanye destroys career with pro-Nazi messages. October 2022. Adidas drops Kanye costs him $1 billion. November 2022. Adidas Qatar 2022 World Cup, D.N.A. November 2022. Musk/YE post within 1 day about Gene/Gene, D.N.A. November 2022. Trump sued by Gene/Gene plus umbrella, D.N.A protection. November 2022. Q posts about D.N.A protection. It's all connected. I have posts that extend these decodes reinforcing point after point, but even just this is enough to see the global work being done right now. I know it's confusing, and that's mostly my fault as I am so focused week to week on decoding rather than presentation. I'm happy anyone can endure this much autism as you have, and I promise it's going to get easier and easier. To help with that, let me give an extremely brief summary of the most important point. D.N.A symbol equals blueprint for path through life equals education/nutrition/medications that define the growth of a human being in practice, not just the absolute result of what a person would become without those things. In theory, a person would be very different than they are without the meddling of brainwashing/medications/fast food/addictions/. D.N.A is used as a symbol to define the pre-planned route a person has in life. Whether poor or rich or comms aware, evolution, or MK'd, the evolution, and so on. It was the point of the post, so I want to make sure you at least remember this single symbol. The P-plant section of the post helps clarify the historical context of this best. It is the literal origin of D.N.A as a science, and when reconciled with the rest of the post we can understand the precise way a difference in status manifests due to being in the pocket of the power structure at the time. Okay. I'm going to keep improving these posts, and I have a couple of great helpers that make graphics and another that has been putting these posts on YouTube. We are moving slowly but surely. I can't be positive what the military coordination desires, but the simple fact I've been allowed to do what I do is a sign our interests have to be aligned on the biggest points. We surely agree that the blueprint outlined for the masses of people in society is appalling and needs an overhaul. To excise the addictions that people succumb to because they have been made blind to it. I believe it's time to transcend the obfuscating nonsense that permeates every piece of reality. That's what I'm doing, and it's what you are doing too if you've read this far. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been D.N.A, Q plus 8 equals Y.